Mes chers amis, mes chers collègues, je vous remercie de bien vouloir prendre place.
Colleagues, if I just may ask you to be seated.
Et de faire silence.
And if we could bring the meeting to order.
Très bien.
Thank you very much.
Mes chers collègues, comme vous le savez tous,
Very dear colleagues, as you know, traditionally speaking, the Commission has this meeting once a year, has this meeting with the colleagues from the Committee of the Regions, colleagues from cohesion policies, and Coter colleagues. Now this is a joint meeting, and usually it takes place midway through October. Now, of course, we're familiar with the European Week of Regions and Cities, and thanks very much indeed to all colleagues for participating in the various events. Auspiciously speaking, for the Coter Regi meeting, we're very happy to welcome the European Commissioner Elisa Ferreira. Thank you very much for being here. You are very warmly welcome in our committee meeting, but of course it goes without saying, welcome to the Coter colleague, my dear friend Isabelle Budino, and we have worked together. We have worked together to save the cohesion budget and also in order to work on better regulation. Now, the subject for today's discussions is the implementation of the Partnership for New Cohesion Policy 2021 to 27, and actually the adoption coming into force very recently of the regulation on cohesion policies, which we've been working on very, very hard, is something that's in all our minds with recent months' trilogue meeting with the co-legislator, and that has required a lot of time, a lot of energy and input in order to make sure that implementation takes place properly. And that's also our Regi Committee responsibility. And that's quite a lot of work, as all of us know. The cohesion policies are the main investment policy at the disposal of the EU in order to cut down on inequality, regional disparities across the whole of the area covered by the Union. But this policy also, particularly, I must say, is very, very important. Very, very important in implementing EU objectives in the area of climate policy and the digital transition, but also it's a key tool available to the EU in order to overcome the socio-economic consequences arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. And could I just remind us of the threats that have made their presence felt within cohesion policies, particularly looking back to the time period before the pandemic was announced, when we had this initial budgetary proposal made by the Commission for the new financial programme, as well as the first budgetary forecast or perspective. This morning I touch on this particular issue because it's now a time to look back a bit in time, historically speaking, to see where we've come from, where we've been. And 2nd of May 2018, the European Commission, as you all know, lifted the veil on the 2021-27 CFP with the expenditure for cohesion policies amounting to a deduction of 10% in real terms compared to the 2014 expenditure, 2014-2020 expenditure. Now, together with the Coter, we fought a very hard battle, and I'd like to salute all the initiatives that were taken in the context of the Cohesion Alliance, the commitment of the former President Lambos, and also the commitments, of course, from Isabelle Budino, and also the commitments of all the members of our Regi Committee, not only in the European Parliament, but throughout member states, so that these deductions were not actually made official. And so where do we stand today, having gone through all that? Well, with a budget commitment for the area of cohesion policy, with the COVID crisis having intervened, which has actually never been at this particular level in the past, and Commissioner Ferreira is saying, Elisa Ferreira, that it's never been the case in the past, and as much budgetary resources has been put into this area, and that means, of course, that we've all got great responsibility, as you were saying. All of us have to make sure that the resources available to the EU and the states actually fulfil their objectives as defined in our regulation, and within a very short time period we were able to adopt a regulation on investment initiatives as a reaction to the COVID crisis, big crisis, as I was saying yesterday. That's witness to the great flexibility within our policy tools and also our ability to react to crises. And therefore, we've left behind the straitjacket of the past in order to be more flexible in committing to financial support measures, which means that we could come up with some very, very good policy responses for the regions, given that we have been facing a period of crisis. What I was saying to you as well was that I want to give the floor to our guest. We're very aware of the very important role we have to play in controlling and enforcing compliance with fundamental principles by which are governed the implementation of EU regulations in the area of cohesion policy. Amongst those principles, could I just pinpoint the principle of partnership? The principle of partnership is something which our committee is very, very committed to, and I think it is also the subject for today's meeting indeed. This has been at the heart of many trilogues which we have been involved in as a co-legislator, and this is a principle which our Regi committee has always pursued and believed in very, very firmly and fought for. And that's very, very important, has been important in our relations with the Council. And so, Commissioner Ferreira, I'm so happy. I think we are very, very happy to welcome you. We'd like to hear some information from you, a discussion with you as to how the Commission is implementing and ensuring compliance with these compliance with these very important principles, very important for us, Madam Ferreira. Another important policy direction underpinning all our cohesion policies, without doubt, is that of greening. This is a historical period for greening cohesion policies. Taking account of that must be based on application of horizontal principles, constancy, which will not actually cause any harm, do no harm, as well as taking account of the minimum 30% of cohesion policy funds being allocated to climate objectives. We've got the climate change battle going on, and also promoting biodiversity. So climate objectives are therefore fundamental objectives within cohesion policies as a whole. So we must be very, very aware of the importance of climate considerations. As I was saying at the start of the Committee of the Regions Week, I think climate policy has now become one of the most important pillars within the Green New Deal, with its various ramifications. And of course, the committee is looking forward to hearing from Commissioner Ferreira on behalf of the European Commission, speaking to us and explaining how firm you are about insisting on implementing the principles which are preliminaries to reaching and achieving climate objectives at the level of member states. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, please, members of the negotiating teams that's been present, but I think I'm right in saying that the European Council sometimes has been very slow, well behind, compared to the policy objectives and requests of the European Parliament. What you achieved in the trilogue, therefore, must be complied with, implemented across all member states and by all management bodies and authorities. My final words on the relaunch fund, well, we know that the massive EU fund with 750 million euros, 390 subsidies, and then the rest with loans, was approved in July 2020 by the EU 27 member states. Now, that budgetary envelope is additional to the funds also attributed within cohesion programming with FEDER, ESF, as well as the Just Transition initiatives. The major question underlying this is how to coordinate well and effectively between these various regulations. It's about synergies, coordination, but making sure that the relaunch fund really plays a role in achieving cohesion objectives, and that is a fundamental objective. These resources as a whole must go towards achieving objectives. Otherwise, there's a risk, as I've said already. As I've said already, the risk is that the principles and objectives of the cohesion policy will be undermined, and that is why we continue to say that what we need is best possible governance of the relaunch plan, working with regional actors and bodies, and this relaunch plan must be based on a territorial approach, and that's a key issue for all of us. And we'd also say that all the regions that we've been talking to and meeting during this Regions Week are saying the same thing, I have the same worries. And they're saying, please help us, please support us, so that we can work in relation to member states. And therefore, of course, Madam Commissioner, we're counting on your support in this particular area. So that brings me now to the great pleasure that I have in giving the floor to Isabelle Boudinot, Coter, and then to Madam Commissioner Elisa Ferreira. Isabelle Boudinot, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Cher Younous, c'est un
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great honour to be here, to be received by your committee under your presidency. It's also a great joy to us with both of you on this top table. Mr. Chairman, Madam Commissioner, the Committee of the Regions knows we can see you as our main allies, our main support. Great introduction, great explanation of the budgetary battle we went through. That was a very important period. We know that that's a major step in the whole ongoing process. Now, let's move forward. Let's pursue this battle. This is based on our partnership. We share this partnership. It's the fundamental way forward to ensuring that the relaunch plan and the cohesion policies actually are used effectively. So, Chairman, really, from the bottom of my heart, thanks very much indeed for your personal commitment promoting cooperation between our two institutions. Because of this, we've set up an alliance, a common front, in order to aid the regions, and it's very important to have done that in the context of cohesion policies. I'm very important, dear Elisa, that you're here. This institutional cooperation is fundamental so that we can ensure the EU offers the best possible policies for the EU, for citizens' future and their everyday life. So we count on the implementation of cohesion policies, coordination with the relaunch plan. We've talked about many of the related issues. Dear Elisa, we know that you're very attentive, you're a great listener, and you're willing to talk with us. I think, you know, Commissioner, there's been tension, there's been mention with the Council and even to the Commission. It's about cohesion policies and the relaunch plan and synergies between the two. I would say that we've missed opportunities here. I said that to Mr. Morigana yesterday in our discussion. The relaunch plan is a great EU initiative. It's based on solidarity, but actually the opportunity we missed was that we could have integrated territories much more. It was absent from the preparatory phase, and it would have a fundamental role to play in the context of implementation based on structural funds and our regional operational operational programs. These methods have worked in the past. We've seen that, and this methodology has improved significantly everyday life of European citizens, setting up research centres, transport infrastructure, energy synergies. And now the Green Deal as a whole, as my colleague was just saying, climate policies, climate considerations are key to structural policies. But also energy and climate questions will only be dealt with properly if they belong to the geographical context and are related to that. We've also not done enough in managing the COVID crisis throughout this pandemic. As far as intra-regional issues are concerned, we've done our best to make masks available in hospitals. We've also promoted access to equipment, promoting cross-border cooperation there. So we were able to overcome the problems there in the end. And irrespective of nationalities in the EU, we've worked together in the COVID context. Thanks so much indeed, Commissioner. Thanks so much indeed to the parliamentarians. And dear President, thanks very much for all your cooperation on your committee.
Some states have made unprecedented efforts in providing solidarity funds, as well as using own resources, but I think there's a lack of trust locally, and the recovery dimension needs the local to be successful, but it's much more centralized. It's blind to the specific features at the local and the regional level. And then citizens, people putting forward projects, stakeholders, find themselves unclear about what Europe wants. And there is therefore a risk of overlap between the structural funds and the recovery funds. There was a great deal of urgency at the beginning. But having said that, some project developers who got in touch with the Recovery Fund have bitterly realized they would have done better to wait for 21-27 because they would have got better funding. So, as the chairman said, I'm not sure to what extent the partnership principle was respected in drawing up the recovery plans. The day before yesterday, in our committee, we took a snapshot of to what extent local representatives felt frustrated and left out of the whole process. About 1.1 million of them feel that they've been left out. Consultations in France were very top-down. Really, it was just an information exercise more than anything else. And some of our mayors who are implementing the recovery plan don't know what can be funded out of the 40 billion odd that was made available. And so that means that those of us that represent the regions really felt that we were blindly following, and when we submit projects, we don't know through the recovery fund if this will be funded. And that's unacceptable. It's difficult for people to decide whether to submit their projects to the Recovery Fund or to the structural funds, and there's a lot of confusion. SMEs are the backbone of the EU and are going to be vital if cohesion policy is to be a success, if the recovery fund is to be a success. And you have to take specific features of local areas into account. If the European Union needs local authorities, local areas also need the EU so that we can live up to expectations and show solidarity and ensure that European public policies are effective and efficacious. Thank you very much. Commissioner, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman.
Cher Président.
And Madam Chair,
Isabelle Boudinot et
Isabelle Boudinot and Yunus Omarjee, dear members of both institutions, ladies and gentlemen, I'd sincerely like to express my thanks for this invitation. I'm delighted for us to be able to introduce into the Week of the Regions this particular meeting, because it's of structural importance to have a debate such as this set against the backdrop of what's being done in Europe when it comes to regional development and the role of the regions and of towns and cities. And I really do believe that the strength that exists at local and regional level amongst governments is a consequence of the democratic legitimacy of those that are elected, and that this is genuine democracy in the everyday life of Europe. And I think that, as usual, I'm going to switch to English because it's the technical working language we use.
As you just said, President, it's more important than ever now. So investing in recovery for all regions, in the green transition, digital transition that leaves no one behind and avoids new digital divide, this is a big challenge. And this weighty role for our policy is not just my opinion. This week, I have spoken to young researchers. It was a very interesting meeting, also in the context of the Week of the Regions. And they are choosing our field because they understand that the consequence of their analysis is important for their future and for the future of Europe. And most important of all, ordinary Europeans are more convinced than ever of the importance of cohesion policy. They are convinced of our contribution in the context of the crisis and in the significance of this policy in the recovery phase. You just mentioned, Isabel, a research that was done in the representatives of local and regional entities, but there is also a Eurobarometer that shows that goes directly to the citizens. 69% of Europeans are aware that cohesion policy is investing seriously in the post-COVID-19 recovery. 41% of Europeans know a project in their region, and this is up from 34% 10 years ago. It's not enough, but it is already a progress. Among those who are aware of such a project, no less than 80% believe that EU projects have a positive impact on their regions. And 59% of Europeans say that our projects make them feel a stronger sense of belonging to the European Union, that they feel more European because of us. And in fact, I find this very encouraging. We are not at the end of the road, but at least there is a more clear perception, in spite of all the problems that we may find in communication of the participation of European funding and instruments in what happens in the different localities. But in terms also of name recognition, among the 10 key funds at the European Union level, cohesion policy is the second, only after Erasmus, which is the most famous one. And finally, just to share with you a couple of numbers, the number of Europeans who think that the European Union cohesion policy should continue has significantly increased over the years. It is now 64% of those who replied. So, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, this is a big issue that we are dealing with, and we are in our once-in-a-generation opportunity. Both presidents made reference to this, not just in terms of the exceptional level of cohesion funding, but also in terms of this favorable public perception and expectation on what we deliver. Ordinary Europeans are recognizing, in fact, the work that we are doing. So this is another pressure on the quality of what we deliver. Let us use this opportunity responsibly to create something which future generations will be proud of. The wins of today are exceptionally favorable to the shape of cohesion policy. Let us use this opportunity to set course for long-term excellence. And today, we have two topics which you both mentioned. I think one of them, it's crucial topics. You asked me to address the question of partnership. I'll try to do it. I strongly believe that successful projects are firmly rooted in local partners and local people. We must do even more in the future. Second, the topic of synergies, especially with the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and it was in particular the topic that was raised by Madame Isabelle Boudinot. Europeans have entrusted us with exceptional levels of funding, and they have a right to expect a good and not conflicting management of the different instruments. So first, trying to address the more details on partnership. So first, the question of partnership I think it is the right moment also to discuss it as our core value and method of work, since we are at the point where the foundations are laid for successful partnerships of today and of tomorrow. Well, we have just approved the Greek partnership agreement, and we are working now at this moment intensively with the member states to prepare the programs. This is the reason why I think it's the moment to address this issue. In all our negotiations, we insist on full respect for the Code of Conduct of Partnership, you know it very well. And in fact, partnership in line with this code is essential for a lot of reasons, but I would just underline two of them. First, to ensure that the investment plans, what we are planning to do, are of good quality, mobilizing all local knowledge, spreading ownership, and taking account of the variety of local conditions that have got to be borne in mind. But a second topic, for ensuring that European programs are accountable to European citizens, that there is a capacity to monitor the implementation of what we have decided to do. The Code of Conduct was already enforced during the 2014-2020 period, and we learned many lessons and are applying them already in the new period. First, we learned the importance of informal mechanisms, of getting together, of discussing. So my services have been paying particular attention to the correct application of the partnership principle in the early informal discussions. For instance, right at the outset in 2019, my services asked the member states to make the programming documents available online so that partners could easily engage with them. Second, we learned that partners are sometimes very willing, but often they lack the capacity, because to be active, to be capable of discussing, of proposing, you need to have a certain technical capacity. So one aspect I would like to underline in this discussion is that in the Common Provisions Regulation, with the help of all the trilogues that we had, with support of this House and very heavy negotiations with the Council, but in the new Common Provisions Regulation, so the chapeau communication that frames the different regulations, it reinforces support for capacity building. So the managing authorities must identify where the institutional capacity of the partners needs to be strengthened. And they can use technical assistance to reinforce and to build that capacity. This is, I think, a very important element. Third, we learned the importance of working with a diverse range of partners. Most member states are making good progress on this. However, some member states still could improve. And we are watching all member states to ensure representation of civil society bodies, of environmental partners, and of the bodies responsible for promoting social inclusion, fundamental rights, the rights of persons with disabilities, gender equality, and non-discrimination. Fourth, we have discovered that there are many good practices out there which are worth sharing. So we plan to build on the previous thematic network to create a new European community of practice on the partnership for 2021-27, where we would exchange best practices, exchange ideas, exchange good examples, discuss the functioning of the Code of Conduct, and prepare updates to this code. Lastly, I would like to remind you, although you were part of it, that in this period, the monitoring committees, the members of the monitoring committees, the effective members, they have a vote, they have a right to vote in relation to these meetings. And there are observers, so you don't have, if you cannot be a member, then you can be an observer. So this is something that really also opens up this management of this instrument. Anyway, my services remain vigilant. We are watching out for breaches of the code, and will require action where such breaches are identified. But of course, we have to be all vigilant and all active if we really want this to work. Now, you mentioned also the synergies with the Recovery and Resilience Fund and plans. And this brings me to my second topic of discussion, trying to reply to you. It is clear that with two investment funds of this incredible scale, we must ensure good alignment to maximize the impact of the European budget. This is good management, and Europeans have the right to expect it from us. Cohesion policy does not start from zero in terms of cooperation with other funds. We already have good cooperation between the various cohesion policy funds, as well as with other EU funds, such as agricultural funds. It's very, very much needed. Horizon Europe, EFSI, and Connecting Europe facility. We are already bringing that same skill in cooperation to the Recovery and Resilience facility. We have contributed to their preparatory activities, we have contributed to assessment of plans, and I am sure that we'll also contribute at the implementation stage. And in quite a few member states, there is a single authority which will manage both cohesion policy and RRF. So we are hoping that the coordination will be easier then, but that will go in the direction of recognizing that whatever policy you do, any horizontal policy, and in particular the RRF, it will have a territorial impact. And more likely than no, divergent territorial impacts in the territory and in the different regions. This is from the books. It's no novelty, but it's important to remember it. In working on coordination, I see some similarities between the funds and some differences. First, I see both instruments as mutually reinforcing because there is a high demand right now for quality investment. The additional firepower of the RRPs and the RRF is a welcome ally in achieving the European Union's objective. The two funds must clearly work together in recovering from the pandemic and supporting the twin transitions, and I would like to add a third transition. The twin transition is to build back better, but unlocking, in fact, the long-term growth potential of the member states and regions. When I talk of three transitions, I think we should have to the green and the digital, the cohesion dimension, when we speak about this building back better, more balanced recovery. But second, there are differences, and you just mentioned it also. The RRF is a reform and investment-oriented instrument based predominantly, also due to the time constraints, at the national level dialogue, whereas cohesion policy will remain regionally and geographically anchored with a focus on territorial development. Another difference is that RRF is, yes, it is build back better, but still very much associated with crisis repair, while cohesion policy is more long-term. We know that territorial cohesion will remain an important challenge for many years to come. This is why I have been calling for member states to take into account, in fact, the territorial dimension of their RRPs, and we must keep in mind the long-term needs of the different regions. There are also synergies with other policies, of course. The issue of long-term needs brings me to the last point. In fact, these synergies. We are helping every region and city to successfully navigate the Green Deal, to create an European fit for the digital age, and to create a socially just union. Since we are doing all of this, it is clear that cohesion policy will have many natural links with other key policies, and we are ready to work with them. Let me give you just a few examples. First, we are working very closely, of course, with European Social Fund Plus to deliver employment, education, social inclusion, health and housing, to make sure that infrastructure investments and human capital investments are well matched. Second, we continue to work with Horizon Europe for innovation, which both puts Europe at the leading edge and which also spreads to our regions. I intend to go even further, and we are working with my Commission colleagues to address a very important issue, innovation divide. Third, we are working with many other funds to provide resources for the health sector. And under CRE+, I'd like to note that the healthcare sector has received regional fund investment of 7.2 billion euros, while under REACT-EU, the regional fund and social fund have already programmed 6.2 billion euros of investment in healthcare equipment, services and staff. So it is a massive investment in health. Healthcare investment is requiring coordination with the RRF, with the EU for Health program, the new program, Horizon Europe, the Digital Europe program, and the InvestEU program. And to give a last example, the Commission just presented a proposal to have the 2022 as the European Year of Youth. In the text of the decision, you will see that a particular reference is made to young people in rural, peripheral, less developed regions. In fact, it is absolutely essential that we don't go on with massive brain drain from these regions and that we create conditions for young people to have a life there, where they were born. In working with other policies and instruments, I am insisting that we need to follow a do no harm, not only to environment, but to cohesion policy and to the cohesion principle. No policies or initiatives should aggravate disparities or hinder convergence. I call on you to translate this principle also in your daily work. I'm closing, but I would like to conclude where I began, talking of the once-in-a-generation opportunity, not just in exceptional levels of investment, but also in public perception. What we do now will resound down the years. There are a couple of key milestones in your policy, a couple of key turning points. I believe this moment today is another such turning point. Will we open the door to broader and deeper partnership? Will we build the capacity of partners and ensure deep local roots to projects? Will we manage synergies with other investments, ensuring that the exceptional funds which Europeans have entrusted to us are well spent and that they deliver on the ground? For me, the answer to all these questions is yes, we will. And I am prepared to do so much more for the success of the policy and for a Europe which leaves no region behind, not in the recovery, not in the Green Deal, not in the digital transition. I hope we can all be together in this challenge and to fight against the risks that hide in these huge opportunities. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think we have the right network to succeed in this. Thank you once again.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Commissaire. Nous allons à présent...
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We'll now start with the debate, starting with the political coordinators of our respective political groups who are going to alternate between institutions. I would ask each and every one of you to strictly respect the speaking time of 2 minutes, so that, of course, that will allow us to hear all the coordinators and possibly have a debate with further members who would like to take the floor. I'd like to start with the EPP group and our friend Pascal Arim. Thank you, Jonas in German. Thank you, President.
yes, we can.
We heard once upon a time, yes, we can, and now we've just heard, yes, we will. The very delicate difference is important because it does talk about the commitment to implement this. Here in this chamber, we have spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in trying to get this agreement through in record time. We've also shown a great deal of flexibility when it comes to the crisis and the reasons behind the crisis. We've been very sensitive in our reactions with CRE and CRE Plus, and I think if we want to hear the heartbeat of Europe, then you need to sit here, because this is where it happened. And we, I think, reacted excellently to this crisis. In fundamental terms, we have changed the criteria to fit the new situation in Europe so that monies coming from the structural funds for investment can be more sustainable, they can be more digitally adjusted, and, this is something I hope, there'll be more money going to strengthening the health systems as well. Even before COVID, I had negotiations on Interreg, and I wanted there to be an obligation to include this in the text. Now, the Council was somewhat sceptical at the time, but following the COVID, or rather during the COVID crisis, we did manage to get that written in, because from the point of view of common sense, it was obvious that health systems needed to be invested in. Now, the problem is that we have invested and we've seen the money and the time going there. Now we need to make sure that the money goes quickly into the countries, or rather to the final beneficiaries, and to get paid out to the projects. So it's important that there isn't too much red tape. We need to make sure that there is not a great deal of administrative costs linked to this. Hence my question is, are there initial appraisals and estimates of what the impact will be of this? Will there be an attempt to simplify tax? Is this what you're hearing from the regions? Are there possibilities to allow the monies to be dispersed more quickly, so that the absorption rate will be higher than it has been on the last occasion? And I will call on the Commissioner and the President of the Commission of the Regions to note this. There are a lot of different sources of funding. How can we make sure that the Commission will avoid any kind of confusion that these different pots of money are being called on at the same time? Because I don't think it would be good if we're slowing down projects because we're waiting for one or another fund that then doesn't actually happen in the end. So I think it would be good if we could see a leading role from the Commission to reduce this confusion. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher Pascal.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Now for the Coter Commission, Emile Bott, the coordinator of the EPP group.
Dear Regi Chair Omarjee, first I would like to extend thanks to you for hosting this year's Regi-Coter meeting. Dear Commissioner Ferreira, thank you on behalf of the EPP group for being with us today. First, cohesion is a pillar of the European project. It is not a technicality, it is a political priority. EU cohesion policy is reducing disparities between regions to create jobs, open new business opportunities, and respond to challenges like this pandemic. Precisely, the COVID-19 crisis showed that cohesion policy is needed today more than ever to bring the recovery to every corner of Europe and strengthen the resilience. In Cluj-Napoca, Romania, besides our direct local involvement, we use the European money, the cohesion funds, to modernize our hospitals with intensive care units. Second, digital cohesion is an essential additional dimension of our traditional concept of economic, social, and territorial cohesion. Digital inclusion should be at the heart of our policies for the digital era. Third, cohesion is one of the fundamental values of our European Union. For me, cohesion as a European value is about working together in partnership in a spirit of subsidiarity and solidarity with the objective to improve the life of our citizens in every corner of Europe. Commissioner Ferreira, I believe it is time to ask ourselves to what extent other EU policies embrace this value? Are the new instruments financed under Next Generation EU, such as the Recovery and Resilience Fund, respect the partnership principle enough? And what is your vision on how to ensure complementarities and synergies between the Recovery and Resilience Facility and cohesion policy? Last but not least, President Omarjee, you said Monday on the opening session of the European Weeks and Regions that any crisis is a crisis of cohesion. You are absolutely right, dear President. So let's work together to keep cohesion at the heart of the European project, because the cohesion policy is the glue which is keeping Europe together. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, cher Émile Bock.
Thank you very much, Emile Bock, for that contribution. I'd like to give the floor now to Constance Creel, who's the coordinator of the S&D group in the Regi Committee. Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, fundamentally, I can echo what Pascal has said. The co-legislators have done their work. The framework conditions or the future cohesion policy is now there on the table. It's a question of implementation now and pressing on with that. And I think we're facing quite a challenge for the coming years when it comes to the old programming period and flanking that, preparing the new money at the same time, but in parallel preparing REACT EU as well and dispersing that money, the Just Transition Fund, not just preparing it, but also actually spending that money. Not to speak of Next Generation EU, regardless of whether that is done at member state level or at regional level. So there is a huge amount of money available that doesn't just need to be managed, but it has to be invested, and it has to be done in a smart way. I've heard that, by way of example, the money made available for Asia, or Bulgaria, in Croatia or Bulgaria will be 30% equivalent of GDP. So these countries are going to have to be investing 5% of their GDP per year. So you're going to need good projects, but you're going to need the wherewithal that needs to be in place. You need energy, you need infrastructure, and you need human resources. You need workers to be able to implement that. So my question is, are we going to be able to achieve this? Or are we going to have to note in 2025 that we had an opportunity to spend money, we just didn't manage to grasp that opportunity? That would be a shame on the European Union. I don't need to say again that, this new path to Next Generation EU is something we need to entertain again later on. I mean, we can't start complaining now about how in 7 years' time we're going to get the member states to make sure that we still need cohesion policy, because we need cohesion in the EU. So I'd like to know how this job of work is going to be done, also between the European Parliament and the Committee of the Regions, how we can intensify that work. You, of course, will see the alarms and red flags coming from the regions, or if things aren't working, or the signals that things are working. And you, Commissioner, I presume you'll also get signals if things are running into difficulties, or if you can reassure us and say, no, everything is working well, it's going along the right path, we've done everything in the right way. Thank you. Thank you very much, Constance Creel, for that very important note of warning. I'd like to give the floor now to Nathalie Sarabezol, member of the Coter Commission.
Oui, bonjour. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Madame la Commissaire.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. And thank you for listening to our contributions and our suggestions. I'd like to say hello to colleagues as well. I'd like to pick up on what's just been said as well. It is true that there are resources that have been set aside. There's funding that's been made available. The question is how to spend them in the right way, to put in place the partnerships we've been talking about. And I'd like like to underscore an important point, and that is that of flexibility, the flexibility that's been put in place when it comes to the disbursement of the cohesion funds during the pandemic, which isn't over yet, but during the pandemic, the Commission did indeed suggest that co-financing be raised to 100% to relax the rules on state aids to deal with the urgent situation. That's a decision which I think needs to be welcomed. But what does worry me, however, is if we're going to try and keep that flexibility, maybe not in the long term, but at least for a year, we still don't have assurances from the Commission on that will happen. The last letter that we had on this didn't cover this specifically. There were no firm commitments along those lines. But the health crisis is still in place. The social crisis is something which is emerging, if you like, or getting worse. And we really will need support from cohesion policies to accompany people during this very difficult period in time, where often member states are having to deal with the spending the monies that they've had to spend during this crisis. We need to make sure there are funds put at the disposal of these people who need the money to accompany people in skilling, reskilling, upskilling, to try and green the whole agenda as well, of course. And in the regions and provinces, there are differences in the problems that people are facing. So we need to try to make sure that the quality we want to see applied will be done throughout the fund disbursement across Europe. So we need to have a degree of flexibility. We don't need it for an infinite amount of time, but we do have to make sure that we can do it so that we can support the people and businesses during these difficult times. And I think without extending that flexibility, we will face problems later on. Commissioner, you were talking about 2022 being a European Year of Youth. I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we do our utmost to help young people, to make sure that that year will prove to be a better one than the last years. And when it comes to European funding, let's continue that flexibility for at least a year. It won't change anything, but it will allow us to be more operational, more efficient across the European territories to help Europeans who need us.
Merci beaucoup. Pour le groupe Renew, Andrei.
Thank you. For Renew, Regi-Coter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam President, Madam Commissioner. It's a pleasure to have the debate today. 2 years ago, on a similar joint event, I have shared concerns about the future of cohesion policy, that it will be slowly overpowered by those central managed programs and funds. And now, after the 2 years, I do not share these issues and these concerns because the cohesion policy during the pandemic has shown that we are able, through cohesion policy, to react effectively and also very quickly. On the top of this, during the last 2 years, we have concluded and finished the negotiations on the new framework, and I'm pretty sure that this framework will deliver on the key future aspects. So the cohesion policy will be still there on the digital climate, and I'm also very pleased that Madam Commissioner mentioned the third transition, this cohesion transition often is forgotten. We talk only about the two digital ones. So I'm very happy that for the future of the cohesion policy is as well bright. Myself, I had the honor to contribute through negotiations on the Common Provision Regulation, and I'm very pleased for the new rules, bringing more transparency, flexibility, less burden, but also this multi-level approach that also local needs are addressed. I would have one thing, one takeaway message for all of you. There is one file which is cross-border mechanism, and this file is being blocked in the Council, and I think it is in the interest of all of us here to make something with it. So I would like to kindly ask you to use all your possibilities and find some channel how to unblock this situation, because this kind of cooperation we will definitely need, and the pandemic has shown it. Once again, thank you very much for the possibility to have this exchange today. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher Andrei. Vous avez
Thanks, Andre.
tout à fait
Thank you
raison
very
de
much
rappeler
indeed, Andre.
l'importance
You're absolutely
de
right. This file is very, very important.
en plénière.
It's covered by a question raised in the European Parliament plenary in Strasbourg.
Très vite notre
And
attention, la commissaire, pour qu'ensemble nous
let's,
trouvions la
Madam Commissioner,
solution
work
pour
together
amener le
in
Conseil
coming up with a solution so that the Council
en mouvement.
will actually move on this. Thanks
Michel
very much indeed. Mr. Michel Riesberman now, please. Mr. Riesberman.
Je vais passer à présent la présidence de notre réunion.
Presidency for this meeting now.
Isabelle Boudinot,
I'm handing over to Isabelle Boudinot,
cette réunion Régi.
since we're co-presiding as between Regi-Coter. Over to you, Isabelle. Thanks, Chairman.
La main, comme on dit,
Well, you
j'étais
could have
parfaitement
actually
d'accord.
hung on.
Vous êtes ici chez vous.
I was quite happy for you to
Il n'y a
preside,
pas de protocole de ce.
and I'm not following any protocol. I don't think either of us are. It's between
En attendant peut-être que
ourselves.
Monsieur
But
Riesberman se
waiting for
connecte,
Mr. Riesbermans
je
to
propose
get
de
ready
passer la parole
and
à
become
un
available,
député, Monsieur
can I
Niklas
give the floor to
Ninas.
Niklas Nisninas,
Est-ce qu'il est parmi
who
nous,
is a member?
coordinateur?
Is he here? Available?
Ninash
Amongst the
Niklas, qui doit
coordinators,
être
Ninash,
connecté en
Niklas.
principe.
I think you're there, aren't you, somewhere?
Je vois que le
Sorry, no,
papier.
that's my mistake.
Il est remplacé par Madame D'Amato.
Madam D'Amato has replaced him. Madam D'Amato, that's on my paper. Sorry about that.
Bonjour. Grazie. Grazie Presidente, grazie al
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the Chairman from the Committee of the Regions, and thank you to the Commissioner. Thank you very much for your contributions. I wanted to concentrate on two vital points, reflecting at this particular point in time just what we're doing means for the towns and regions of Europe. The Regi Committee conducted a study from the European Policy Centre on lagging regions, how the use of GDP had prevented people from moving on a very worrying trend. And on lagging regions and diverging regions, regions that were diverging from the European average and national averages, these regions had negative growth, but they also had unemployment levels that were going through the roof. A lot of these regions were in Greece, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, the Mediterranean areas, and they were identified as regions that were particularly vulnerable. These are regions where we believe we need a specific, very concrete initiative to help them to overcome the social and health and economic challenges they face. Otherwise, they'll be left behind. Their citizens will be left behind. There'll be a lost generation. If that's not to be the case, we have to act now. So, Commissioner, what do you think it would be possible to do, also in the light of this study? As Mrs. Boudinot said, the recent publication of the EU Annual Regional and Local Barometer does show quite clearly the latest impact of the pandemic on the hopes of these areas to really introduce a green and digital transition. Commissioner, I do have doubts that for these regions, the RRF may not be a turning point, because we have asked for genuine involvement in drawing up the national plans for these areas, but that didn't happen. And moving on to the final point, on the scoreboard of the Delegated Act for monitoring, the RRF plans, the common social indicators lack a territorial dimension again. So the scoreboard as it stands doesn't make it clear whether the more disfavored regions have actually genuinely benefited from measures introduced. An example in my country. We are using competitive tendering processes. For example, yes, creche places will be created, but not in the south where they're needed, but in the Veneto and Lombardia. So really, we need to incorporate a geographical indicator. And Article 165 of the TFEU really does need to be, I think, respected within the Commissioners' College. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. En accord avec la présidente du Coter, je continue la
Thanks
distribution.
very much indeed. Well, with your achievement, agreement, Coter, President, we've got to catch up with time. We're behind time here. Marie-Antoinette Fontenay, President of the Corsican Assembly, I'd like to give you the floor. It's lovely that you're here following last week's meeting that we did together in Bastia. So over to you, Madam. The floor is yours.
Madame Maupertuis, est-ce que vous pouvez appuyer sur le bouton Speak?
Madame Pertuis, I think you're on mute there.
Vous m'entendez? C'est bon?
Can you hear me now?
Très bien.
Yes, excellent. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chairman.
Bonjour, Madame la Commissaire.
Good day, Madam Commissioner. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here with us. Thanks, dear Chairman. Thanks, dear Chairman, both the Chairman here. I have been involved and very, very happy to see the open days taking place. And very briefly, can I just take this opportunity simply to say a few things? I agree with my colleagues, firstly. I share their concerns about the partnership principle. It's about the integration of regions and cities in the plans. We need consistent local implementation here. We're attached, we take very seriously cohesion and solidarity. That's the foundation of the EU project. Therefore, Madam Commissioner, what about European islands and their situation? Not talking about far off, ultra-peripheral, but these islands have geographical problems, constraints, expensive storage, warehousing, transport, energy, trade difficulties, fossil energy supplies and costs, water, waste management. The islands have suffered more than elsewhere from the COVID crisis because they rely on tourism. Tourism disappeared basically completely for several months across these various islands. Now, presently, these islands face two major challenges: relaunching the economy and the ecological transition. These are contradictory, mutually speaking, with each other. So we've got to make a choice here at some point, haven't we, between the two? Now, we've got to strike the balance here somehow. But in getting access to European resources, the islands often miss out. For the EU 27, we've discussed with the previous Commissioner, Madam Grittu, the difficulties facing islands, but actually Article 174 from the EU treaty hasn't properly been applied in our context. So, do these principles compete, or can we coordinate them? What are we going to do about the future difficulties facing the islands? We're now in a post-27 period. We've got to look in the long term in promoting cohesion, and therefore under the guidance of the presidents from Coter and Regi, and together with our Nordic and Mediterranean island colleagues, can we please work together as well as we can in discussing with you, Madam Commissioner, these issues that I know we take very seriously. And finally, Madam, thanks very much indeed for being here and sharing your precious time with us for ED. Thanks very much indeed. Last speaker, Madam Conti. From ID.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to Commissioner Ferreira, and thank you for the Coter Committee from the Committee of the Regions for this opportunity to have an exchange on cohesion policy. We know that the partnership agreements that will be approved in the short term and the structural fund programs are a part of the recovery and resilience plans necessary following the pandemic. My region, the Veneto, is happy with the partnership agreement with the Commission because the agreement recognizes an improvement in the allocation of funds from the ESF Plus and the ERDF, and the options for action very much reflect the requirements of our area. At the same time, I think it's important to stress some points that the agreements have to take into account as reference points. In other words, flexibility and adaptation. It's important to recall that if you have two specific guidelines, then that could mean that the provisions that we have become more rigid. At European level, we also need to have coordination between the national recovery and resilience plans and European programming of the cohesion policy to avoid any possible overlapping and overburdening the regional structures with further administrative burdens. Cohesion policy is one of the most well-known and appreciated by European citizens. But there's one point not to underestimate. Based on a recent poll, 65% of local and regional bodies of the European Union feel they weren't sufficiently listened to or involved in the decision-making process for the European policy. I think that the European institutions need to pay attention to this point. The Commission should encourage all the member states to further involve regional stakeholders. Otherwise, we run the risk of increasing the divide between the EU and local areas. Plus, we have to listen to the request from the local and regional bodies who are asking for an extension of the flexibility measures that were introduced in 2020. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Toujours pour le groupe ID, le coordinateur.
Thanks, ID group still, and the coordinators. Mr. Pavel Branda from Coter.
Thank you, Chair Omarjee, Chair Boudinot, and Commissioner Ferreira, for your highlighting the importance of respecting the partnership principle. We as the ECR group in the COR advocate for a strong cohesion policy for 2021-27 for all EU regions, with a strong emphasis on the principle of partnership and multi-level governance in the preparation and implementation cohesion policy programs. On Tuesday, the CR adopted the opinion on effectively engaging local and regional authorities in the preparation of the partnership agreements and operational programs, for which our ECR Vice President Juraj Droba from the Bratislava region is a rapporteur. The opinion comes timely and puts forward recommendations to strengthen the involvement of local and regional authorities in the preparation of the partnership agreements and operational programs. I think it's not possible to create effective strategic documents which will drive the implementation process in the whole programming period without a full involvement of local and regional authorities. The opinion was based on discussions with all relevant stakeholders and EU institutions, but also on a study that shows that involvement of partners in preparing the new programming period has improved only slightly in comparison to the previous period. This is a proof that we need to look for innovative methods to ensure the greater advances are made. Our goal is that the local regional authorities become real partners. There is a great difference, I think, between formally consulting local regional authorities and involving them as equal partners at every stage of preparation and implementation.
So I think it's now time, dear Commissioner Ferreira, for the European Commission to play a crucial role to make sure that the code of conduct is kept and the partnership is respected. Mrs. Krill asked a question, what can we do together to overview the implementation of the funds? So maybe we can have a regular annual common debate on this topic to identify the challenges and also come up with some suggested corrections. Maybe our services can look into this proposal and see how we can fulfill. Just a short remark on another topic, that is cross-border cooperation. I have just shared with Commissioner Schutza on the debate on the Conference on the Future of Europe a call of never allowing the closure of borders. But in relation to cohesion policy, I think not strengthening the Interreg in this financial period and even witnessing its decrease in both relative and real terms is a great disappointment and missed opportunity. I think especially at this time, we're not sending a very good message to the inhabitants of border regions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Mosdanovska. On vous remercie de respecter les 2 minutes.
The floor is yours. 2 minutes, please. Thanks.
Dziękuję bardzo. Szanowna Pani Komisarz, Szanowny Panie Przewodniczący, Pani Przewodnicząca, bardzo dziękuję za możliwość dzisiejszego spotkania, wymiany tych poglądów.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to have an exchange on the implementation of cohesion policy. We've had some difficult times, but I think we've had some positive results. This cohesion policy is one that's important for all citizens from all regions. And we need to ensure better financing and more flexibility. And I think we're in a difficult phase of implementation now. This is a policy that during the pandemic crisis showed itself to be one of the most effective policies, one which reacted most rapidly and was most appreciated. So there were some positive aspects. Having said that, I have a couple of other comments to make on behalf of my group, and in particular, the delay in disbursing funds under the partnership agreements. And I'd like to know actually for the 21 to 27 period, just what the situation is with the grants, for example. Because the funds are going to be used for investments and for programs which are for the benefit of citizens, and we want to see more rapid absorption of the funds than has been the case. So what actions have been planned to accelerate the partnership agreements? And I'd also like to ask about what one can do to speed up the recovery plans. They have been designated a priority. There has been an attempt to work on these during the crisis, but in some member states, where recovery programs were presented, like Poland, they haven't yet received a rapid or positive response. And so really this is a situation that's incomprehensible in political terms for citizens, for the beneficiaries at various levels. It's really not understandable. So the recovery plans really do need to be accepted quickly. While they're still in date, because people can't just keep waiting. That runs the risk of all kinds of damages at European level. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Sunny from the Greens.
Chairman, Commissioner and President. It has been proven by many studies and confirmed by experience that involvement of local and regional governments contributes considerably to achieve the objectives of European cohesion policy. The partnership approach is really a participation process, encompassing horizontal and vertical cooperation of all relevant actors. This leads to shared ownership and everybody feeling responsible to contribute to a successful outcome also by mobilising their respective stakeholders. The European Code of Conduct and Partnership provides the key rules for involvement relevant partners in the implementation of the European structural and investment funds, and we call on the Commission, but also on you, members of the Regional Committee in the European Parliament, to monitor closely its application. There are still too many member states where central administration does not show a constructive attitude towards real and constructive collaboration, and we want this to change. We propose that 10 years after the introduction of the Code of Conduct in 2024, a study should be carried out to assess the applications of its recommendations, and this study should be discussed in the Regional Committee and in the Cotter Commission of the Corps. I am pleased to state that there are also good examples that deserve to be shared broadly, and that could be done in an online, interactive and multilingual communication platform and be complemented by other forms of exchanges, including physical meetings and events. I want to suggest that Member States shall be required by the Commission, on the basis of these experience, to elaborate action plans explaining how they plan to improve the application of the partnership approach in the current funding period. And I'll wrap up very finally. Can I just say that finally, the multi-annual programming cycle needs to allow a certain flexibility, adaptation to new challenges and support for new common European policy objectives, such as the transition towards a carbon-neutral, sustainable and resilient economy and society. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Dimitris Papadimoulis pour
Dimitris Papadimoulis, on behalf of the left.
Ευχαριστώ, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Θεωρώ πολύ σημαντική την σημερινή μας κοινή συνεδρίαση.
I think this meeting is very important, particularly with the presence of Commissioner Ferreira and Mrs. Bodino. And I'd like to ask primarily the Commissioner about this point. We're faced with implementing so many instruments, for example, the resilience instrument, and to give an idea of the importance of the resilience for the regions, for local authorities, they're very concerned about just how these significant amounts of funds that fall under the Recovery and Resilience Fund will actually be spent, because the distribution of the funds to the member states on the basis of a criteria of the governments should help to benefit territorial equality, should it not? But we're worried that in certain regions there'll be the governments concentrating on certain central regions rather than outermost regions. So my question to the Commission is, what can be done to ensure that when these funds are distributed, they're distributed fairly, and so the outermost regions won't be punished, particularly if maybe politically speaking they're not run by the government party. We do need fair distribution of those funds. And then a second question has to do with island areas. Now, we know a great deal of attention needs to be paid to island regions, and I'd like to ask the Commissioner what instruments exist for island regions. We have articles of regulations which do set down provisions for protection and set an obligation on all of us to ensuring that there's fair distribution to the island regions too.
Nous avons 5 demandes de temps d'intervention supplémentaires. Nos collègues Coter et Regi sont là depuis le début de la réunion. Je leur donne la parole pour 1 minute maximum. Mais respectez votre temps de parole pour que la commissaire puisse répondre également de manière très ramassée. Et je remercie les interprètes de nous accorder un petit moment supplémentaire de quelques minutes, puisque nous devons
Thanks to the interpreters for giving us a few more minutes. We are scheduled to leave by 1 o'clock. I'd like to give the floor to Daniel Buda.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte. Domnul Emil Boc spunea mai devreme că politica de coeziune este liantul care ține
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Bock said earlier that cohesion policy is the link bringing the EU together. So we can see how important it is that we have effective implementation of cohesion policy. 2 questions, Commissioner. Firstly, the 30% which should be implemented to combat climate change. Have you had debates with the beneficiaries, with stakeholders about this? And how have you established this 30% percentage? And then another question on the possibility of overlapping. You could have projects that could come under the recovery and resilience plans, but which could also be financed by cohesion policy. So I think there is a risk that some projects under the recovery plans won't be able to benefit from cohesion funds. Sousa da Silva, 1 minute. I'd like to thank the chairs and the Commissioner, and I'm going to be speaking Portuguese today because the Commissioner is here with us. I wanted to say that the package of funds, particularly the cohesion funds, seem appropriate to us, but, Commissioner, we are worried about the way in which they'll be applied, because we're used to regulations being applied in a certain way. They're proposed by the member states, but the Commission can intervene. The Commission said quite rightly that no region should be left behind, and we do agree with that, but we do feel that thanks to asymmetries amongst the regions, there are local communities that are growing a great deal and others that are becoming increasingly impoverished. The metropolitan area of Lisbon, where I'm the mayor, is made up of 18 municipalities. 13 of those are getting richer and the others are becoming more impoverished. So we can't finance these equally because, as I've said, there is a difference amongst them. So, Commissioner, it seems to us the next regulations have to reflect this fact, the asymmetries that exist even within regions. We do welcome what you have done, and we are sure that your expertise in these areas will ensure there is justice in establishing these funds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President. Dear Commissioner Ferreira, dear President Coter, indeed, there is a very, very important discussion. We all know that the cohesion policy remains and is the main investment policy at the European level, and this is very important for all European citizens, and not only for them, for our future. And to be very briefly, because I have only 1 minute speech, I would like to ask kindly the Commissioner Ferreira some more things, if you can tell us about the Just Transition Fund, take into account that is a new one, and we have to achieve our climate goals and to ensure just transition. More than this, take into account that this week was dedicated to the regions and cities, and this is very important. I kindly ask you to be more flexible, because the plans that they have to realize have to be updated all the day due to the challenges that we have to face. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup. Dernière intervention.
Thank you, last speaker, Mr. Blazak.
Une minute.
Madam Commissioner, Chairmen, ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing here economic and regional cohesion. That's why I would like to mention regional airports, because they are very vital for sector of tourism and economic development of especially peripheral regions. However, the aviation market in the EU has changed substantially from the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many months of limitation and for some time a complete half of air traffic deprived the regional airports of a significant part of revenues. Many of these airports face bankruptcy. That's why I think it's a time to help them. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, chers collègues.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I'd like to ask the Commissioner to do the impossible. There were a great many questions that were put. So perhaps you could be succinct in answering the numerous questions that were put, particularly on the recovery plan, on proper synergy. You have the floor for between 5 and 7 minutes.
I will try to do the impossible, but I'll try. But because I wanted to answer each person individually. So on the Monsieur Arimont, he's not there anymore, but it was about several people called about speed in transfers. So decree went very, very smoothly. So it has been transferred. It's now more than 22 billion that has been transferred with full flexibility. REACT is on the way. It's 30 billion that have been approved for reprogramming, and the flow is going on what you were mentioning, the capacity of regions and member states to implement in practice good projects, joining and making the best use of these instruments. I think it's very important to take into account that the most interesting aspect of the probably the most of the RRF is in fact that it can support reforms, and these reforms are the reform, for instance, of the functioning of the public administration, so improving the capacity to manage. And DG reform is giving technical support to regions, to municipalities, to countries in order to have a vision of how to reinforce this aspect. This is a very important element. Then there were specific questions on the possibility to have the extension of 100% financing. We have been addressed in that direction, but that will put a lot of pressure on the European budget, because in fact there will be a problem of liquidity, as you can imagine. And so I think at the same time, all the other funding are becoming available, and so it's doubtful if we really need to have this, to go through this. There was this mentioning, particularly of Andrei Konek, on cross-border mechanism. This is blocked in the Council, as you know, so we can address a revision of it, but we have got really to have a deep revision, I think. Rosa D'Amato was mentioning a very important thing. It's lagging regions and diverging regions. In fact, we'll be sharing with you the cohesion report that shows exactly that we have problems with lagging regions, but some of them are growing very, very fast. And then there are dynamic regions that are losing a bit of dynamic. But in between, there are countries and regions that are stuck in the middle. And this calls for a very intelligent way to move from basic infrastructures into more sophisticated instruments to trigger development or to speed up development. There were questions from Italy. In Italy, we didn't finish yet the partnership agreement. There was but we are working very hard. Also, we are working very hard with the partnership agreement of Poland. So trying to, and the discussions are going on. There were questions on islands. Islands suffered a lot, but they also could have, and a lot of them received a lot of support to build back better, and from REACT and from CRE. So this emergency support was there. Now to build back better, there was a question that I would like to answer, because there was, at least I understood it like this, there was this, I think it was Marie Maupertus, that said that green is contradictory with the recovery in those islands. We see a lot of islands that, on the opposite, that are taking the green challenge and the climate challenge as a new promotion for them, to the tourists as well, saying, okay, we are going to make the full circularity, we are going to have independence with the renewable energy instruments, and I think this is a very interesting opportunity. And here I ask also my dear friend Dimitris Papadimoulis that mentioned exactly the Greek islands that are also covered, some of them, by the Just Transition Fund support. On Just Transition Fund, Rovana was asking me about flexibility. Yes, there must be flexibility, but we cannot spread the classification of Just Transition Fund all over the place, because it loses a capacity of intervention. So we are discussing with some member states, but also in relation to Mr. Papadimoulis, of course, we are looking very carefully. I just came from Western Macedonia. Greece has got a megalopolis also, and the islands, but we are going to the places to see how we can minimize the social and economic impact of this transition. Mr. Buda was asking who decided 30%. It was you and us. I mean, it is in the legislation, as well as it is in the legislation some other aspects like regional airports, this question. Regional airports have been generally excluded, but there are some specific cases in which they can be, so it is in the legislation. It was the subject of a very big debate. Now, I think to close down, I'd like to announce that we will be starting in the Commission, of course, a revision and a monitoring of the partnership principle, how the Code of Conduct is being applied, and this platform that I mentioned in my speech is there. I think it is very important not to overlap between funds, but to play on synergies. This can be done partly at the European level, but it has to be done at each member state level. Now, allow me just 1 minute to answer to my compatriot. Esse problema, o problema do desequilíbrio.
The question of the imbalance between regions is something that needs to be addressed. And we need to look at the development plans for the region as a whole. Development can't be concentrated just on a town or on the strongest points. That's the point of a development strategy. Obviously, you can divide regions up again and again and again, or just concentrate on the capital.
Often, I'll finish, just the capital. Often we end up with then the demands for transfers from the support from the most backward regions to the capital, because the capital that is strong is excluded almost from the funding. And so this is something that we have got to have a broader perspective on it. And let me finish by, I'm just finishing, just to quote, to finalize what Mr. Bock said, saying that glue, this is the glue, cohesion is the glue that keeps Europe together. And so I think this is a very nice way to close this meeting, and to say that I couldn't answer in more detail because the President doesn't allow me. So, so thank you very much, and I'm always available to come.
Thank you, Commission, for having done the impossible. The interpreters are going to have to leave us, but I have to pass the floor to my co-chair from Coter for some concluding words.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman, Madam Commissioner.
Constance
Krell made it clear that there are a lot of funds which need to be reinvested, and we need to ensure that they're managed by the regions and by the authorities and governments, but there's no point unless local features are taken into account. And in the recovery plans, as my colleague Mupatri said, that we need to pay a lot of attention not just to Eurobonds but to the climate, because otherwise there's a risk. The Committee of the Regions does, of course, act as an organisation that passes on warning bells, and we will be telling you about the impressions our members have about implementation. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure for me to work with you. I have to say, I know you're going to be leaving the chairmanship of Coter. We've made a great deal of progress in developing the partnership between the Regi Committee and the Coter Committee, and I'm sure all of our members would like to thank you for everything that you have done for Coter and for cohesion as a policy. Thank you. See you next year when we move on the 2022 version of the European Week of Regions and Towns. Thank you once again, Madam Commissioner. I'd apologise for having rushed you. And I would also like to express my thanks to the interpreters for everything they've done for us this morning and for having to, in fact, agreed to work a little bit late. Thank you very much and bon appetit, everybody.